China's extreme weather phenomena are still not over as Chinese leadership issued 6 new warnings on natural disasters. As the US moves to ban TikTok, the app was exposed for spying on users through a method banned by Google. And Xi Jinping sent a veiled message suggesting he intends to be chairman of China for life. I'll be looking in depth into this. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. Concerns are growing of a food crisis in China where many farmers have lost everything amid the large-scale floods. And the issue is even now starting to get attention from legacy news outlets. CNN interviewed a farmer over WeChat who lost close to $28,000 worth of produce. He said, quote, "The rice was nearly ripened and ready to harvest before the flooding, but now everything is gone." And the disasters are still not over in China. According to the official Weibo social media page of China's Emergency Management Department, the National Meteorological Center issued an orange rainstorm warning that continued on August 12th. And on August 13th, various coastal regions across China are expected to be hit with heavy rains. Beijing, southern Shanxi, and northern Sichuan will have around 10 inches of heavy torrential rains, and there will be strong weather such as thunderstorms and winds. Now, Beijing issued 6 different warnings on some of the natural disasters, and these range from its low-level blue warning to the high-level red warning. It said there's a yellow-level torrential rain warning, yellow-level geological disaster and meteorological risk warning, mountain torrents warning, yellow-level thunder and lightning warning, and blue-level gale warnings. Chinese citizens are being asked to avoid dangerous areas such as mountains, scenic spots, and riversides. In addition, as of 5:30 p.m. on August 12th, Beijing Daxing Airport had canceled 185 flights. As of 6 p.m., Beijing Capital International Airport had canceled 217 flights. A total of 420 flights were canceled. Now, in addition to the rising food prices and lost stores of food, these disasters are also causing a heavy toll on the Chinese economy. On July 22nd, China's Emergency Management Department announced on its official Weibo page that, quote, "Since the main flood season in June, floods have affected 27 provinces, regions, and municipalities, which affected 45.5 million people, 35,000 houses collapsed, and direct economic loss was at around $16.78 billion in American cash." Now, the CCP's Emergency Management Department announced, quote, "In August, the national direct economic loss from natural disasters reached 96.58 billion yuan. That's about $13.9 billion. Now, according to data from China's National Bureau of Statistics, on August 10th, Customer Price Index CPI, it rose by about 2.7% year-on-year in July, of which food prices rose by 13.2%, with pork prices rising by 85.7% year-on-year. Now, in Jiangsu province, people were seen fighting over meat that fell on the road after a shipping vehicle crashed and overturned on a highway. Netizens commented it showed the true situation of the Chinese Communist Party's rule. Now, on August 4th, a truck carrying 10 tons of pork from Shanghai to Shandong passed through Yanchen, Jiangsu province, collided with other vehicles on the highway, and then overturned. The truck's back was damaged and boxes of pork were scattered to the ground. Hundreds of local villagers began a meat-grabbing war, quote unquote. Groups of villagers drove trucks, tricycles, and cars to the scene to steal the meat, and even tore away the broken doors of the vehicle. In the end, only 3 tons of meat were left out of the 10. The driver told the Chinese media that the insurance company would not compensate for the stolen meat and only compensate the remaining 3 tons of meat at a discount. The total value of these pork products is more than 400,000 yuan, which is about $57,588. And the stolen meat was worth about 280,000 yuan, or about 40,000 US dollars. They stole about 267 boxes. Now, netizens said this is citizens under the rule of the CCP. They commented also, quote, "The CCP has caused the Chinese people to lose their moral values." And also said, quote, "The true situation of China under CCP rule," again when commenting on that food truck. Also on the note of food, CCP leader Xi Jinping has given new instructions for people to stop wasting food. Now, the CCP state media Xinhua published an instruction from Xi in its special column, Learning from Xi, where the media publishes announcements, news updates, and promotions of propaganda on party leaders. Now, the announcement said, quote, Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, President of the State, and Chairman of the Central Military Commission, recently issued important instructions to stop food waste. He pointed out the phenomena of food waste is shocking and distressing. And it says, quote, who knows that on the dining plate every single grain means hardship? It's from Xi himself. It continues, although my country has a bumper harvest in grain production every year, we still have to be crisis conscious about food security. The impact of the new coronavirus epidemic this year has sounded the alarm for us, again raising concerns of potential food shortages. Now, in other news, at around 9:50 p.m. on August 11th, a fire broke out in the service shop of Dongfeng Nissan in Guangzhou. Residents at the scene said it took only 1 minute for the fire to burn the entire workshop. After nearly 2 hours, the fire was finally under control, and firefighters pointed out there was a large amount of flammable materials, such as engine oil, in the repair shop, and the strong winds that night caused the fire to expand quickly. And some news on the Chinese social media app TikTok. As the US moves forward to ban the app, the Wall Street Journal has recently discovered that TikTok had been using methods banned by Google to bypass security safeguards in the Android operating system to collect unique information from millions of mobile devices. It said this data would allow TikTok to track users online without users being able to opt out of this. And in Hong Kong, meanwhile, China's largest state-run banks operated in Hong Kong are taking steps to comply with U.S. sanctions on the 11 leaders, including Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam. Now, 4 banks have announced their policies on this so far, including Bank of China, China Construction Bank, and China Merchants Bank. Meanwhile, there is heavy momentum of companies pulling out of China. UBS reports on a recent survey of U.S. firms. It said 34% of them produce in China, and of those, 76% have moved or are planning to move their capacity out of China. About a third are planning this move in the near future. And meanwhile, after Chinese telecommunications company Huawei was forbidden to purchase chips under these new sanctions, the CCP has been making an increased push to develop high-tech chips domestically. Now, in this latest move, it has hired over 100 engineers from Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co., which is the world's leading chip maker and a supplier to companies such as Apple and Google. And in other news, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo commented on the recent visit to Taiwan by U.S. Secretary of Health Alex Azar. And during the interview with Newsmax on 2 occasions, Pompeo referred to Taiwan as a country, something that would be seen as a major blow to the CCP, which attempts to forbid other countries from recognizing Taiwan as a separate country.
So Secretary Azar is there for the singular purpose of working with the Taiwanese government on something that's important to everyone in the world, making sure we come to understand this Wuhan virus, to make sure we understand the threat, to make sure we know how Taiwan so successfully dealt with this issue in their own country. We want to share with them what we've learned, what we know too. We know an awful lot about this.
Pompeo also commented that the CCP's anger over Alex Azar's visit to Taiwan, the highest level meeting between a U.S. and Taiwanese official in over 40 years, reflects the CCP's, quote, weakness.
I must say, Sean, I'm always surprised that when the United States send its health minister to another country, why anyone would find that so threatening. You find threatening, or you find angering, or you find somehow challenging to your very nation's national security. I think that tells you a lot about the weakness of the Chinese Communist Party and the fact that it could feel threatened from such a visit.
And this has been the latest in a string of very strong statements against the Chinese Communist Party from Pompeo and other U.S. leaders. Now for the broader stories for today. First off, the Epoch Times received internal documents listing Communist Party committee members in the headquarters of ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok. Of all the 138 CCP committee members named, all are in corporate management and other high-level positions and make up the backbone of the company's operations. Among those named is the company's chief editor, Zhang Fuping, who the documents say became a CCP member in 2013. Now, Fang is responsible for all content on ByteDance and TikTok. During a 2018 internal training, he stated that employees, quote, must stay true to the main responsibility of the enterprise and absolutely not allow the internet to become a platform for the transmission of harmful information and rumors. In 2019, Feng oversaw the opening ceremony for the Ministry of Public Security, where an operation was launched to monitor TikTok users' activities through special TikTok accounts. The monitoring agents were assigned from 170 police organizations from across China. And the deputy director of the online security department of this organization, Zhang Hongye, said the accounts would take advantage of TikTok's influence to maintain social stability. Now, it's known that when Chinese companies grow beyond a set point, they are required by the Communist Party to have a Communist Party liaison assigned to them. The CCP will exert more control over an industry based on how much the company can support the interests of the CCP, and it reserves the right to nationalize a business or to consolidate a whole industry on a whim. Now, in other news, Xi Jinping, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, allegedly sent a veiled message in a recent manifesto suggesting he intends to be leader for life. This was included in a statement on the 5th plenary session of the 19th Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, which will be held in Beijing in October. Now, this statement was carried by the CCP mouthpiece news outlet Xinhua. It states that attendees will assess the proposals of the next 5-year plan, which goes until 2025, and stated they'll also assess, quote, future targets for 2035. Nikkei noted that many China watchers took the note about 2035 as being a secret code, suggesting that Xi intends to stay in power at least for the next 15 years when he turns 82. And when he turns 82, that will be the same age that Mao Zedong died at. Xi previously did away with term limits as well. As Nikkei reports, quote, Mao was the eternal chairman of the Communist Party. By comparing himself to Mao through this method, Xi is trying to pave the way to becoming the second leader to stay in power for life. Now, this ties as well to the Chinese language and way of thinking. For example, in the Chinese language, many words can mean many different things. It's up to the person listening to interpret what they actually mean. And when it comes to the way Chinese Communist Party politics operate, they also play similar games to this, where they can give hints to things, and they expect the person to understand the hints. And so when it comes to Chinese analysis, oftentimes among China watchers, you do see this kind of logic where they take certain words and certain phrases in context of these things to draw deeper analysis. Now, the situation with Xi, however, is very complicated. When it comes to internal power struggles of the Chinese Communist Party, many news outlets these days often criticize Xi directly instead of criticizing the CCP itself. Without Xi Jinping, the Communist Party would still be the Communist Party. Meanwhile, tensions are beginning to rise between the Philippines and the Chinese regime. Philippine Vice Admiral Giovanni Bacordo is calling for diplomatic protests against the presence of 2 Chinese research ships near the Reed Bank, which the Chinese Communist Party has claimed ownership over, among its claims over most of the South China Sea. Now, Bacordo said the CCP is trying to provoke the Philippines into firing, quote, the first shot. In addition to this, Philippine President Duterte has now accepted an offer for the vaccine from Russia for the novel coronavirus, the CCP virus. He has even volunteered to test the vaccine personally. Now, this comes after Philippine President Duterte had already appeared to back down from challenging the Chinese Communist Party's claims over the South China Sea, saying the Philippines couldn't risk a war with China, and that maybe another leader could do so. In the same statement, he made a request to the Chinese regime to grant his country access to its CCP virus vaccine. And now it appears that both sides of this are falling apart. The CCP is making incursions into Philippine territory and is provoking its military leaders. And Duterte has now accepted the vaccine from Russia instead. Meanwhile, Android Authority had an interesting analysis piece about how every Chinese company that manufactures smartphones should, quote, prepare for the worst. It said that amid the trade war between the United States and China, where the U.S. is taking actions against Chinese app manufacturers, the term, quote, untrusted could mean future actions against Chinese smartphone manufacturers. Now, this makes an interesting point about how the negative branding from the U.S. ban on TikTok and WeChat could impact other Chinese electronics. But it also goes deeper than this. Many Chinese-made smartphones and other electronics have been found in the past to have backdoors built into them, or have firmware installed at the chip level, it's like software at the chip level, that automatically relays user data back to China. There have been many cases of this before where Chinese smartphones, even sold on Amazon, are found to have these types of vulnerabilities on them. And if TikTok is now being banned on these grounds, a big question going forward will be how other Chinese electronics that do the exact same thing might be treated by the US. Now, in other news, the CCP has been building a network of surveillance platforms in the South China Sea, including in international waters. This is part of its Blue Ocean Information Network, developed by a state-owned company called China Electronics Technology Group Corporation. Now, the sensor network is allegedly being used to help in the exploration and control of the area, but has faced criticism for its dual use in supporting the CCP's military operations. Now, networks of sensors like these underwater aren't totally unheard of. We can look, for example, at the Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS, of the United States, which is used to track submarine movements. That was used during the Cold War against the Soviets. But the CCP is using this now, a system just like this that it has created, to exert its claims of control over the South China Sea and in its attempts to regulate transit through the territory. And so in other words, it's not just being used, for example, for security, like the SOSUS system. It's being used to push for control and to push for military actions as well. Meanwhile, Indian traders have launched a new China Quit India campaign with protests to boycott Chinese products. And amid this boycott, Chinese exports to India have fallen by 24.7% and trade has dropped by 18.6%. Now, all of this followed the border incident where Chinese soldiers killed at least 20 Indian soldiers. Evidence suggests the attacks were premeditated and ties to a common CCP tactic to shift attention outside of China when the CCP itself is in crisis. But given the increasingly strong and ongoing backlash from India, it's likely the Chinese Communist Party got more than it bargained for with India's moves to decouple from China, and these appear to be just starting. And given the trajectory of this, the direction that India is going into, including with the new Quad alliance that it joined with the United States, Australia, and Japan, this is likely only to increase. Other countries may also follow India's example, given that it's not tied to US policies or the perceptions of that. India represents a model that Asian nations in particular could replicate when standing up against the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the conflict between India and China over the border clash, where Chinese soldiers again killed an estimated 20 Indian soldiers, has reached a new chapter. This one focused on a scandal around poorly made Chinese military vehicles. Now, a video has gone viral in China and in India of Indian soldiers smashing the windows of Dongfeng vehicles. These are Chinese knockoff Humvees used by the CCP's People's Liberation Army. Now, while the Indian Army has claimed the video has no connection to the border standoff, however, the attention has shifted from that attack to the man who uploaded the video, a Mr. Zhou, who claimed the poor quality of the vehicles led to the deaths of Chinese soldiers, and who was allegedly arrested by the CCP and forced to apologize for uploading the video on August 4th. Now, Zhou's apology letter was published by the Chinese military, and Indian news outlets have been carrying the story as an example of corruption within the Chinese Communist Party and of the poor quality of its knockoff military equipment. Now, India's WION News reported that Chinese netizens have also jumped on the debate and are saying that the People's Liberation Army vehicles are, quote, hollow. Now, again, this comes after the Chinese Communist Party downgraded the description of its J-20 fighter jet, one of the pride and joys of the CCP, from being a fifth-generation jet to a fourth-generation jet, which essentially means it goes from being the equivalent of an F-35, one of the most advanced jets in the US military, to being equivalent to about an F-16, one of the older jets. This is a major blow to the image of the Chinese Communist Party and its military. Again, the jet combined with these military vehicles. This directly impacts the perceptions of Chinese patriots and military hawks when it comes to the way they view the Chinese Communist Party, especially amid the conflict with India, where India is making fun of the Chinese military. Now, in other news, we often hear about how China owns America's debt. But what's lesser known is that the United States owns Chinese debt as well, more than they have of ours, about $1.6 trillion worth. The difference is that the Chinese regime has never paid a cent on it. But now an organization is pushing for the Trump administration to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable in a move that could wipe out the $1.1 trillion in U.S. debt owned by China with money left over. Now, to learn about the progress in collecting this debt, I spoke with Gianna Bianco the other day. She's president and chairwoman of the American Bondholders Foundation, which has power of attorney for 95% of U.S. bondholders and who has been leading this move. We'll jump into this interview now. Hey, Gianna, thanks again for being on Crossroads.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, we all hear about America having debt with China. China owns America's debt. We hear this all the time. What a lot of people don't talk about, though, is that America actually owns a lot of Chinese debt. And apparently they haven't paid us back on that. Will you tell us about this?
Well, that's absolutely correct. And of course, by design. Most people say, oh, don't yank the dragon's tail. The pro-China propaganda that we see today, that is by design. Countries issue debt, just like China, America, U.S. treasuries, etc. Americans bought China's bonds, which is what has built their country and their infrastructure, and they refuse to pay America back, even though Americans pay China $72 million a day on U.S. treasuries held by China. China paid Great Britain for the very same bonds Americans are holding, but they refuse to pay Americans for that debt.
Now, how much money are we talking here when it comes to the amount that China owes the United States?
In excess of $1.6 trillion.
Wow. And so what is this? I know your organization, you've been trying to hold China liable to these debts. What is the situation in terms of making that happen?
At the end of the day, this is 100% legal on the ABF side, the American Bondholders Foundation, which represents 20,000 U.S. citizens in 46 states. The law is on our side. This is legitimate, credible, sovereign debt. China just refuses to pay it. It's all political. And it's given an enormous amount of blockade by Wall Street firms, corporate America, that are running protectionary measures for China, just like we've seen at the Securities and Exchange Commission, where China doesn't abide by rules and regulations. And as we have seen around the world, China abides by no rules except for China's rules.
When it comes to the debt that China holds from the United States, the money we pay them every day, as you mentioned, could this
Correct.
Nullify that?
100%. Congress passed laws many, many years ago. The Secretary of the Treasury has the authority to bring in the bonds from the American Bondholders Foundation at the direction of the President of the United States and use these bonds to extinguish our debt, saving hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, extinguish our debt by basically exchanging paper to vapor to China. I mean, we've seen congressional leaders say, well, let's just withhold interest payments to China, or let's just take the bonds they have. Look, we can never do that. We must always, always uphold the full faith and credit of the United States and of the dollar. However, to do a debt swap is basically paying China with their own paper, and therefore never defaulting, never downgrading our credit rating status. And it's a debt swap. It's done around the world all the time, not uncommon.
Thanks again for being on Crossroads.
Thank you so much.
Now, with that said, folks, we're broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And also, the Epoch Times needs your support. Now, we were founded by Chinese Americans who created a media that could not be censored by the Chinese Communist Party. We faced heavy pressure for this over the years, both from China and through its influences in the West. And given the recent shifts in Hong Kong, we're asking again for your support. Please consider joining us on Patreon or donating to Crossroads. You can find the links in the description below. Of course, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.